Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm honored to be included with the dignified speakers that we have today. I also have a slideshow, so professors don't go anywhere without our slides. So if you would, turn yourselves a little bit so that you can also see the slides as we go through. There are just a few quotes and images that might be helpful for us. So it might be stating the obvious to say that I stand out a little bit from the other speakers here. I am, many of you know, I am non-Muslim. I'm neither a religious cleric or authority, but an academic one. So I'm bringing an academic perspective to today's theme, but I'm also a believer. I'm Christian, and so I consider myself to be a cousin to you in the family of Abraham. And I'm also here as a human. As my friends in Egypt would comment many times when I was living there, Kuluna beni Adam. All of us are children of Adam. So I'm here as a human as well. I just wanted to say I will be speaking some words that are sacred to you, words that are sacred to me. And if I do so without the conventions that are typical, please forgive me. I do so with the utmost respect for all of our traditions together. So at Rutgers, I teach courses mostly on Islam and Islamic history, women in the Middle East, but I also teach courses in comparative religion. And one of the most common topics that we cover in some of my comparative courses is, of course, the concept of the divinity and how do we talk about God. Next slide, please. And one of the first things that you learn as a scholar of comparative religions is that almost any statement that you make, someone will disagree with it. I might say, so in Hinduism, Hindus believe that you should follow the path of desire completely before moving on to the path of renunciation. And someone will raise their hand and say, no, that was not what I taught. That's not what I was taught. That's not what I believe. And I'm sure most of you in this room are familiar with the frustration of people saying to you, well, this is what Muslims believe, or this is what Muslims think about X, Y, or Z, right? So as scholars at Rutgers and elsewhere, what are we to do in this situation, right? So what we do is we look for trends, and we focus on trends all the time, being aware of the fact that they are trends, they are not universals, and that there is an incredible amount of diversity within any tradition that you want to look at or think about. So one of the trends that I do cover in my courses is that in every religious tradition that we have looked at, when people want to speak about God, they are quite honestly stumped. How do you describe something that is indescribable? How do you encapsulate something that is infinite, right? Our minds, our brains, our humanity is limited, while God is unlimited. One of the images, next slide. One of the images that I like to show to my students to try to get them to understand this perspective is this painting by René Magritte. It may be familiar to some of you. Does anyone speak French here? What does it say?
Ceci n'est pas it's not a pie. I don't know pie in English.
Simple enough. So the says this is not a pipe. But if you look at it, it sure looks like one, doesn't it? What I get my students to think about is that painting on the wall is actually not a pipe in a literal sense. It's simply a picture of a pipe, right? So in very much the same way, the words that we use to describe God are pictures of God, but they can't encompass God. So in the way that I can hold the pipe in my hand, I could get a pipe and hold it and show that this is, that's not a pipe, this is, but I cannot hold God in my hand. Next slide, please. So in the Islamic tradition, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the 99 names of God, right? So you might say, well, why 99? Why not 100? Well, there are different interpretations to this, but I think most people would agree that 100th name represents the mystery of the unseen, the mystery of God, that we as limited human beings with our limited language and brains cannot get at that part of God, right? Next slide, please. And of course, all of the traditions have ways of expressing this idea. Just a few of them on the screen. On the left is an image from Jewish Kabbalah, which is the mystical tradition in Judaism. They have what's referred to as the Sephirot, which are described as sort of emanations of God. Justice, mercy, right, qualities of God, but really getting to the point that we can't, again, encompass all of what God is. In Christianity, we have the Trinity, which is a paradox where it's not something we're supposed to understand, how God can be divided into three parts, that this is God, and it is very much beyond our understanding, but that we can see God in different aspects in a very similar way. And in Hinduism, there's a saying from the Upanishads, neti neti, which translates as not this, not this. And the idea here is that you can go around the world and you can point at everything you see and say, not this, not this, not this. In other words, God is not any of these particular things. God cannot be likened to a physical body. God cannot be likened to rooted into a specific location. God is beyond all of that, right? God is beyond anything that we can possibly understand. Next slide, please. But also in all of these traditions, we are told that God doesn't leave us in the lurch. He doesn't leave us without having some way of understanding who He is and what He means to us. And so in the Quran, I'm sure you're familiar, we have many, many verses that talk about the signs that God provides for us to show us about God's presence and about God's majesty and God's beauty. Next slide, please. God also shows us not just His majesty and His beauty, but God shows us what love is. And we have these verses from the Bible, from Hosea. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bonds of love, and I became to them as one who lifts the yoke from their jaws, and I bent down and fed them. In Corinthians, we're told that Jesus told His disciples, I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, because you were not ready to receive it. And here we have images of God as a loving, caring, nurturing parent. And so God shows us in these scriptures and many, many others how the aspect of His love for us through also the love that we share with each other. And so we have the examples of holy families in many different traditions. Next slide, please. In Christianity, we have the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. In the Old Testament, we have the example of the mother of Moses, whose intense love for him was no match for Pharaoh's tyrannical efforts to subjugate the Hebrew people. And of course, in this tradition here, there is the Ahlul Bayt. You have the traditions of the Prophet saying that when they crushed Lady Fatima behind the door, it was if they crushed me, he said. Hurting Lady Fatima is the same as hurting me. He also said, Hussain is from me, and I am of Hussain. So it is in the love of the Prophet for his daughter, in the love of the Prophet for his grandson, and the love of this Holy Family for each other that we are given an example of what God's love is like. Next slide, please. One of the most powerful images in all of religious history is the image of Lady Zainab, standing before the corrupt Yazid. Zainab has lost her family, almost all of her family. She has lost her uncle, she has lost her cousins, she has lost her nephews, she has lost her beloved brother. And we are told that she cries out in agony. In this single powerful image, we see beyond any shadow of a doubt how her love is like God's love, and how tearing the love of a brother from a sister, or a nephew from an aunt, or a child from its mother is like tearing away the very love of God. Next slide, please. In a recent academic study, a scholar named Edith, I'm sorry, I can't read this screen. I can have the reference for you later. This recent study talked about the concept of the state of exception, which is when the sovereign or the ruler decides to suspend the law. In this case, he would withdraw protection from certain individuals or certain groups and declare them as able to be killed without reprisal. The academic theory goes that when individuals are thrown into such a situation, they will necessarily devolve into a bare animal-like existence, living outside the political order and unable to participate in it, that they will give up hope and all pretense of human civility. There's a Roman term for this kind of individual, homo sacer. At Karbala, there was just such a state of exception. A ruler who suspended the law, withdrawing protection from this particular family, and deciding that they could be killed without reprisal. By all intents and purposes, this dire situation should have thrown Lady Zainab and her family into this state of hopelessness and despair. However, the scholar who studied this case found this not to be the case at all. She examined Karbala as well as a modern community that draws on Karbala as a living example, the Syrian shrine town of Sayyida Zainab, just south of Damascus. It began as a refugee camp in 1948 and continues to take in refugees from different legal regimes in the region. In these places, where no one could be blamed for losing hope, for giving up, for being crushed by the weight of tragedy and oppression, this scholar found just the opposite. She found individuals who showed strength, who showed resistance, and indeed who showed power in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Why? This power was clearly and demonstrably drawn from the example of Lady Zainab. Next slide, please. Lady Zainab did not allow herself to be crushed, did not allow the unjust Yazid to defeat her. And we have this quote from a scholar who has done work with the Shia community in Lebanon and describes some of what she was told by women in the community. Layla detailed Zainab's entrance into the prison. Another prisoner inquired of her, "How are Ahl al-Bayt?" Zainab responded that they were dead, but continued in a strong voice, I am of Ahl al-Bayt. I am Zainab, granddaughter of the Prophet Muhammad, sister of Imam Hussain, Ana Zainab. Lady Zainab claimed her power through the bonds of her family, her grandfather, her brother, and the strength of her own role in this holy family. We're told by scholars in all of our traditions that these holy family bonds are none other than images of the bonds of love that God has for us, and that all humans can relate to this kind of love, that they are given the example of God's love in the love that they experience in their own families. Next slide, please. Indeed, the traditions of Imam Hussain and Lady Zainab show us that this is a human trait, not just a Muslim one, not just a Christian one, and not just something old from the past. In your tradition, you say that every day is Shura. In every age, there is a Yazid, and in every age, there is an Imam Hussain, and in every age, there is a Lady Zainab. It seems to me that Lady Zainab is crying out today. In Texas, in Florida, in Michigan and New York, she's crying out. Because the tearing away of children from parents, of brothers from sisters, is not just a crime against humanity. It is a crime against God. Next slide, please. The good news, as we're told in Christianity, and as the love and strength of Lady Zainab shows, is that just as you can't destroy a mother's love for her child or a sister's love for her brother, you can't destroy God's love for us. This love is evident all around us. It gives us strength, it gives us hope, and it gives us power to fight and defeat the forces that oppose us, that try to degrade us, that try to oppress us. We resist, we fight back, and will continue to fight back. Because we're told in every religion, perhaps in different words and different images, that God, quote, God is closer to us than our jugular vein. God is with us every day, every moment, every breath we take. Amir Hussain, a Muslim faith activist from Washington, D.C., and medical school student, was reflecting on this ayah. And if you give me just a second, I want to read the quote from his article. He's considering what this means as a medical student who's studying the human body. He says, I find it interesting that the Quran mentioned critical veins of the head rather than those of other organs that are just as important. Indeed, severing other large veins in the thigh, heart, or liver, for instance, would also cause death. It may seem strange to find connections between cardiovascular physiology and the Quran, but I found myself linking the two while learning about the jugular vein in medical school. I remembered the Quran verse. And indeed, we have created man, we know whatever thoughts his inner self develops, and we are closer to him than his jugular vein. I was amazed that a document first recorded nearly 1,400 years ago would make reference to such a specific part of the human body. And I began to reflect on how the clinical significance of the jugular vein might relate to Islamic beliefs. And then he talks about the other veins and their importance, and he says, by focusing on the jugular vein, the Quran might be implying that one should trust in God's absolute power even at the most vulnerable point in your body, which is the jugular vein. Even at the most vulnerable point in your body, God is there to protect you. So to conclude, we fight for the love of family, and we fight for the love of family because fighting for the love of family is also fighting for the love of God. And we know that this is not a futile fight because God has never left us. Indeed, it is when we are at our most vulnerable that God is closest to us. Thank you.